Oh, good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
This is Alfred Hitchcock speaking. In the past, I have given you many kinds of suspense pictures.
Changing channels is not only foolhardy, but also extremely dangerous. So I don't believe you ought to try it.
Alfred Hitchcock started his career with film in 1920 when he got the job as a title designer for a studio in London. 3 years later, he got his first chance at directing a picture when the hired director fell ill, and Hitchcock finished it for him. The studio was so impressed by his work and gave him his first directing job. His legend would begin there as he would go on to direct and make more than 50 films in the course of the next 6 decades. The films remain likable classics that, despite their age, continue to entertain new audiences. Born and living in England, he made a great deal of financially and critically successful films in Europe during the 20s and 30s, before moving to the United States with his family in 1940 on a contract to make movies here. In 1942, when Hitchcock made the movie Saboteur, film companies began to call his films after him, like Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho and Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds. Hitchcock's nickname was the Master of Suspense, and he well earned that title. His movies are of the suspense thriller, adventure, and horror genres. Many of them dealt with crimes and mysteries. Hitchcock loosely based some of his stories off of real murder and criminal cases. Movies like Rope and Rear Window are 2 examples. Hitchcock has dozens of trademarks in his movies that made him the popular icon he is today. He famously makes personal cameos in just about all of his films. His movies often use the wrong man or mistaken identity theme in which a character loses his identity or is assumed to be a criminal or a spy. Almost all of the leading ladies in his movies were blondes, most famously actresses like Grace Kelly, Janet Leigh, Tippi Hedren, and more. He was always dressed up while on the set of his movies. He hated shooting on location and would rather shoot in a carefully constructed set in a studio where he had full control of the lighting. He was pretty well known by the 1950s, but his fame and fortune really took off after 1955, when his TV show, Alfred Hitchcock Presents, premiered for the first time.
Good evening. I hope you'll excuse me if I appear a trifle excited, but I've just come into possession of a cure for insomnia. It comes in capsule form. For best results, they must be taken internally. Here is the handy applicator. It is an amazingly simple device. An idiot can operate it, and indeed many do.
In addition to making cameos in his movies and appearing in his TV show, he also appeared in the trailers for his movies. Hitchcock continued to make films after this period, including the 5 he is most famous for: Rear Window with James Stewart and Grace Kelly, Vertigo, again with James Stewart, North by Northwest with Cary Grant, James Mason, and Eva Marie Saint, Psycho with Anthony Perkins, Janet Leigh, and Vera Miles, and The Birds with Tippi Hedren. Psycho, a horror thriller film, is arguably Hitchcock's most successful and the most famous of his work. Hitchcock had began to take note of all the low-budget, black-and-white B-movies by other directors in the late 50s and early 60s that made big money at the box office. So Hitchcock brought aboard a TV crew and hired not-so-big stars and wanted to put together a really good, inexpensive, black-and-white movie. The result? Hitchcock's biggest success. The film only cost $800,000 to make and earned more than $14 million in 1960. Apart from the famous scenes, locales, and quotes, the music was another huge part of the film. The soundtrack was by Hitchcock's favorite composer, Bernard Herrmann, whom Hitchcock doubled his salary for his work on Psycho because he believed 33% of the effect of Psycho was due to the music. Psycho and The Birds are part of the horror genre. However, today's audiences don't find the movies as scary as it seemed in the 60s, partially because audiences today who see horror films demand the scare factor in much larger doses. However, all his films remain as entertaining cinema classics. Unlike the horror element of a few of his films, the suspense remains as strong as ever. Alfred Hitchcock passed away peacefully in his sleep on April 29th, 1980. His legend, his trademarks, his profile, and his movies, among other things, live on and continue to be as popular as ever.
Mr. Hitchcock, why do you always make mystery films?
Well, life is a big mystery, isn't it? It always has been. I think people are intrigued by mystery to find out about things they don't know anything about. That's a mystery. I think my mother scared me when I was 3 months old.
You
see, she said, boo. It gave me the hiccups.
Yes?
And she apparently was very satisfied. All mothers do it, you know. That's how fear starts in everyone.
That's an interesting insight into psychology. I didn't realize that.
Weren't you ever booed at by your mother?
What frightens you personally, Mr. Hitchcock, if anything?
Any trouble frightens me. I was once asked, what is your idea of happiness? And I said, a clear horizon.